What does a mother do when the system fails her? Hunger knocks at the door, and pride is all she has left. What Mei Ling did with a jar of traditional coconut kue would change 2 lives forever. The traffic light had been red for 20 seconds, but Mr. Tan barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on his phone screen, where the financial closing figures for his development company, Suntech Zenith Holdings, glowed green for the consecutive quarter. It was the kind of success other men dreamed of, the kind of success he had long ceased to feel. It was the gentle tap on his window that pulled him out of that digital silence. He looked up, ready to dismiss whatever it was, but what he saw left his fingers suspended over the screen, pressing nothing. She stood at the edge of the pavement with a glass jar filled with coconut kue, clutched to her chest as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. And perhaps it was. She wore her cleaning uniform, the same one he had seen every morning for months in the corridors of his corporate building, and she smiled at drivers with a dignity that didn't beg for pity. She was asking for an opportunity. It was Mei Ling, his cleaning employee. Mr. Tan slowly lowered his window, as if the gesture required more time than usual. Mei Ling saw him, and her smile froze. Not from fear, but from shame. The kind of shame only good people feel when caught doing something the world might misunderstand. Mr. Tan. Her voice didn't tremble, but her hands tightened slightly on the jar. They are coconut kue. I make them myself. If you're not interested, no problem. She wasn't asking for permission, she was informing him, and something about that distinction hit Mr. Tan right in the chest. The traffic light turned green. Cars behind them began to honk. Mr. Tan didn't move. How much do they cost? Mei Ling blinked in surprise. The whole jar, SGD, 26 kue. He took out a note and extended it through the window. She handed him the jar with exactly the 2 hands her pride demanded she use. The cars continued to honk. Mr. Tan drove off, but he couldn't stop looking in his rearview mirror. Mei Ling had been working at Zenith Tower, the corporate headquarters of Suntech Zenith Holdings, for over a year. She arrived before any other employee and left when most were already home, having dinner or resting. She cleaned the executive floor's restrooms with the same care she cleaned the entrance lobbies. She made no distinction between spaces others saw and those no one noticed. No one in the company knew much about her. She greeted politely, worked without fuss, and disappeared as if she had never been there. She was exactly the kind of person a fast-paced world learns not to see. But if someone had taken the time to truly look at her, they would have seen what Mr. Tan began to see that afternoon in his rearview mirror. A woman carrying something too heavy for her shoulders, yet she didn't bend. What no one in the company knew, what Mei Ling hadn't told anyone, because pride is sometimes the only coat you have left, was that her son, Kai, had been on a waiting list for weeks for spinal surgery, an intervention that was not optional and could not be postponed much longer without consequences that doctors pronounced in the same cold tone used to discuss the weather. The company medical insurance covered the basics. The surgery was not basic. 1, 2, 3 Mei Ling had done the calculations dozens of times on the bus ride home, in the kitchen of her small HDB flat while Kai slept, in the building corridors while the floor still smelled clean. The numbers always came out the same, impossible, until she remembered her grandmother's recipes: coconut kue, tamarind sweets, homemade kue bangkit. She had grown up watching her make them, selling them at the local hawker center, filling a metal tin with the dollars from each packet. Her grandmother always said that dignity isn't begged for, it's earned through hard work. So Mei Ling started making kue. Every night, after returning from work, with aching feet and a tense back, she would light the stove, melt the gula melaka, and lay the sweets out to dry on craft paper. The next day, she would carry them in her glass jar, the same one her grandmother had used, and as soon as her shift ended, she would stand at the traffic light on the main avenue, 2 blocks from the building, where she cleaned the floors for the company's most powerful man. She had never crossed her 2 worlds. Until that afternoon, Mr. Tan entered his condominium without turning on the lights. He placed the jar of kue on the kitchen island and poured himself water. He drank slowly, looking at the glass without seeing it. He couldn't get the image of Mei Ling at that traffic light out of his head, not because it seemed strange for someone to need money. He had been signing multi-million-dollar contracts for years, and knew perfectly well that the world was full of people who needed more than they had. What he couldn't shake was something else. It was the way she held that jar with both hands, upright, without apologizing for being there. When was the last time he had held something like that? Mr. Tan had everything that was supposed to define success. A company that built hospitals, shopping malls, and housing estates across the region. A condominium on the 22nd floor with a view of the entire city. a name that opened doors before he even had to knock. And yet, there was something in his life that had felt hollow for months, like a building with a perfect facade and an unfinished interior. His late father, Mr. Tan Senior, who had started with a neighborhood provision shop and had turned the family name into a synonym for honest work, had told him something shortly before he died. Something Mr. Tan had filed away somewhere he didn't visit often. Money that costs you nothing teaches you nothing, son. Be wary of successes that come too easily. At the time, he had interpreted it as old man's nostalgia. Now, at 42, with a jar of coconut Q on his Italian marble kitchen counter, he began to suspect his father had been much wiser than he had wanted to believe. The next day, Mr. Tan arrived at the building 40 minutes earlier than his usual time. It wasn't something he normally did. His assistant, Ben, an efficient young man who organized his life with Swiss clock precision, was always surprised when the CEO appeared before 9 a.m. That morning, Mr. Tan went directly to the HR department, not his office. "Good morning," he said, from the doorway of the small office, where Miss Devi, the HR manager, was already checking emails with steaming coffee next to her keyboard. "I need Mei Ling's file. Maintenance department." Miss Devi looked up, surprised. In a year, she had never heard Mr. Tan ask for anyone from the cleaning team by name. "Is something wrong, Mr. Tan?" "No, just information." The file was brief. 1 year and 3 months of service without any absence, any delay, any complaint. Performance evaluations with the department's highest scores. A marginal note from the previous supervisor, MDM. Go, which read, "Exceptional worker, arrives early and leaves late. Without her, this building wouldn't shine as it does." Mr. Tan read that line twice. Then he saw what he expected to find, the salary level, and something tightened inside him. It was close to the minimum wage for the sector, with a small punctuality bonus that she hadn't missed once in 12 months. He closed the folder, returned it to Miss Davy without saying anything else, and went up to his office, with the feeling that something important had just begun to move, though he didn't yet know in what direction. That same afternoon, Mei Ling was finishing cleaning the 30th floor corridor when she heard her name. She turned around. Mr. Tan stood by the glass door of the boardroom, hands in his pockets, and an expression that wasn't exactly that of a man who signed multi-million-dollar documents without blinking. "Mei Ling, do you have a moment?" She carefully leaned her mop against the wall. "Yes, Mr. Tan." They entered the room. He closed the door. Mei Ling remained standing next to the nearest chair, not sitting, because no one had told her she could, and because in that world, people like her quickly learned not to take up more space than they were given. "Please sit," Mr. Tan said. And in his voice, there was something different. Not the automatic authority of a boss. Something more akin to the discomfort of someone about to say something difficult. Mei Ling sat on the edge of the chair. "Yesterday, I saw you at the traffic light on the avenue." Silence. Mei Ling said nothing. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain, didn't lower her gaze. She looked directly at him. "I know," she finally replied. "Why do you sell sweets after your shift?" It was a direct question, unembellished. And Mei Ling received it in the same way. "Because I need to, Mr. Tan." "Do you need more money?" She considered the question for a second that lasted longer than usual. "My son needs an operation. It's not an immediate emergency, but it can't wait forever either. The insurance doesn't cover it completely." "I'm saving up the difference, Mr. Tan looked at her with that expression men accustomed to controlling situations wear when something slips out of their hands. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to belated recognition. "How much is left?" "That's between my son and me, sir," Mei Ling replied with a calm that wasn't coldness. It was a boundary, one she had every right to draw. Mr. Tan nodded slowly. He didn't insist. "I understand." There was a silence, neither of them hurried. Outside, the city hummed as always. Inside, something was shifting quietly. "The Kwe were good," Mr. Tan finally said. Mei Ling looked at him, and for the first time since she had entered that room, she allowed a small smile to reach her lips. "They're my grandmother's recipe." "It shows." Mei Ling stood up, picked up her mop, and left the room as she had entered, with her back straight and without asking permission to occupy the space she deserved. Mr. Tan was left alone in that boardroom, where decisions worth millions of dollars had been made. And for the first time in a long time, the decision he had in mind had nothing to do with contracts or profits. It had to do with asking himself what kind of man he was who, until yesterday, hadn't seen what was happening 2 steps from his own door. Dignity isn't begged for, it's earned through hard work, and Mei Ling knew that better than anyone. What Mr. Tan didn't know, what he would still take time to discover, was that Mei Ling wasn't just fighting against numbers. Kai, her son, was 12 years old and had a smile that could light up a room. He also had a diagnosis that came without warning when persistent back pain eventually led to 3 X-rays, 2 MRIs, and a conversation with a doctor who chose his words too carefully. Severe, progressive scoliosis, requiring surgery. Mei Ling had listened to the words with Kai sitting beside her, holding her hand, and had done what mothers who cannot afford to break down in front of their children do. She breathed, nodded, and asked what the next steps were. When they left the consultation room, Kai looked at her with those eyes that still held something of a child and said, "Mama, nothing bad is going to happen to me." And Mei Ling knew at that moment that her son was comforting her, that he had perfectly understood what the doctor said, that he was being brave not for himself, but so she could remain standing. That was Kai, 12 years old, and already protecting his mother from her own fear. That night, when he fell asleep, Mei Ling cried for several minutes in the kitchen with the tap running, so the sound of the water would cover her sobs. Then she washed her face, made herself a tea, took out the notebook where she kept her accounts, and began to calculate. There was no room for paralysis. Kai needed the operation. Everything else was just figuring out how. Days after the meeting in the boardroom, Mr. Tan did something no one in his company expected. He convened a meeting with Miss Devi and the chief operating officer, Mr. Raj, a man with neatly combed hair who had been with the company for 17 years and had learned to read every move of the CEO with veteran precision. When Mr. Tan entered the room and closed the door, Mr. Raj crossed his arms and waited. Miss Devi opened her folder. Neither spoke first. "I want to review the salary structure of the maintenance staff," Mr. Tan said directly. "The entire operational team, not just cleaning." Miss Devi looked up. "Is there a specific situation that prompted this, Mr. Tan?" "Yes," he replied without elaborating. "Mr." Raj observed him with that sideways glance, people who have seen too much to be surprised, but enough to recognize when something important is happening, often use. "Mr. Tan, salaries are within market parameters. We comply with everything the law requires. Complying with the law is not the same as doing what is right, Mr. Raj." Silence. It was the first time in 17 years that Mr. Raj had heard the CEO say that phrase. "What do you have in mind?" Miss Devi asked carefully. "I don't know exactly yet," Mr. Tan admitted. "But I want the numbers on the table by next week, and I want to know if we have any support program for employees with medical situations in their family." "We don't have one," Miss Devi replied. Mr. Tan nodded as if that answer confirmed something he already suspected. "Then we need to have one." The meeting ended 20 minutes later. When Mr. Raj and Miss Devi walked out into the corridor, they exchanged a quick glance. They said nothing, but both were thinking the same thing. Something had changed in Mr. Tan, and no one yet knew if that was good or if it was going to complicate everything. That same afternoon, leaving the building, Mr. Tan took the long way to the car park. The traffic light was red. Mei Ling was there with her jar. This time, when he lowered the window, she looked at him without surprise, almost as if she expected him. "Another jar, Mr. Tan?" "Two," he replied. She handed him the 2 jars with the same usual calm. He gave her the money. She took it with both hands. But before the traffic light changed, Mr. Tan said something Mei Ling didn't expect. "Do you also sell them in the building among the employees?" Mei Ling looked at him. She calculated. "No, I've never done that." "Why not?" "Because I don't know if it's allowed." Mr. Tan looked her directly in the eyes. "It's allowed." The traffic light changed. The car drove off. Mei Ling stood on the pavement with the empty jar in her hand and something new in her chest that she didn't yet know how to name. It wasn't hope. It was too soon for that. It was something smaller, more fragile, like when a door that had been closed for a long time moves just a centimeter and a thread of light enters from the other side. Enough to see that there's something on the other side. Not enough yet to know what. Zenith Tower had 30 floors of glass and steel, 142 registered employees on its payroll, and a cafe in the lobby that sold coffee at prices no maintenance worker could frequently afford. Mei Ling had known that from day one. What she didn't know was what would happen the next morning after Mr. Tan told her those 2 words. "It's allowed." She arrived for her shift with the jar of kueh wrapped in a cloth bag, tucked into her backpack as always. Nothing had changed in her routine. Same time, same bus, same service entrance. But something felt different in the air, like when the sky changes color before the rain and you still don't know if it's going to be a storm or a relief. She started with the restrooms on the second floor, then the corridors of the third. When she reached the fourth floor, where the design team's offices were, one of the junior architects, Sarah Lim, who always greeted her with genuine kindness, saw her enter with the trolley and raised her hand. Mei Ling, do you still bring those coconut kue? Someone told me you sold them, and I've been wanting to try them for days. Mei Ling stopped, slowly took the jar out of her bag. Yes, SGD20 for the jar. Sarah Lim already had the note in her hand. Before her shift ended, she had sold 4 jars. The next day, 6. A week later, people were waiting for her in the corridors. What Mei Ling didn't see, because she was on the lower floors working, was what happened that same day on the 30th floor. Mr. Tan arrived at his office at 8 a.m. with a punctuality that lately surprised Ben, his assistant, because the old Mr. Tan arrived between meetings and calls, always with his mind elsewhere. This Mr. Tan arrived, sat down, and thought. That morning, he had the report he had requested from Miss Devi on his desk, the complete salary structure of the operational staff. 43 people. Porters, cleaning staff, internal messengers, maintenance technicians. 43 names with 43 figures that Mr. Tan read one by one, in silence, without interruptions. When he finished, he closed the folder and stared out the window. The city stretched out below like a map of other people's decisions. Glass towers built by hands that had never stepped into their lobbies. Avenues paved by workers who didn't own cars. Buildings designed by architects who would never live in them. Ben knocked on the door. Mr. Tan, you have the partners meeting at 9. Ben blinked. Cancel it or reschedule? Reschedule. And tell Miss Devi to come in 10 minutes. When Miss Devi entered, she found Mr. Tan standing by the window with the folder in his hand, and an expression she hadn't seen before in her years working with him. It wasn't the face of someone about to give an instruction. It was the face of someone who had just made a decision they knew would cost them something. Miss Devi, I want to implement a staggered increase for all operational staff. Starting with the lowest levels, I want the project ready before the end of the month. Miss Devi opened her notebook. How much are we talking about? A real increment, not cosmetic. Something people will feel. Mr. Tan, that will affect the operating margin for the quarter. The partners will ask. Let them ask. I'll answer. Miss Devi looked at him for a second longer than necessary. She was a woman who had been processing corporate decisions for years without batting an eyelid. But this was different. This didn't come from the financial department or a profitability projection. It came from somewhere deeper inside. May I ask what motivated this change? She asked carefully. Mr. Tan looked at her. A jar of coconut kue, he replied, and explained nothing more. That night, Mei Ling arrived at her HDB flat with tired feet and a lighter backpack than usual. She had sold all the QA of the day before 4 p.m. She counted the money on the kitchen table with the same seriousness with which an architect reviews blueprints. Every dollar in its place. Every figure noted in her notebook. Kai was sitting opposite her, doing homework with the lamp tilted towards his notebook. Because the ceiling bulb had been failing for days, and the replacement was one of those expenses that always came after the urgent ones. How was your day? He asked without looking up. Good. I sold everything. Everything. Kai looked up and smiled. It was his father's smile. Mei Ling had thought many times without ever telling him. Wide, unreserved, the kind that doesn't calculate how much space it takes up. How much more do we need? He asked. Mei Ling hesitated. Kai hadn't asked that number for months. At first, he did it often, with the anxiety of children who feel guilty for costing their mother something. Then he had stopped asking, and Mei Ling never knew if it was because he had learned to trust or because he had learned not to expect. Still some way to go, Mei Ling said honestly, but not as much as before. Kai nodded, returned to his notebook. Mama? What? When we don't need any more, will you stop selling the kue? Mei Ling looked at him. I don't know yet. I don't think you should, Kai said, with that seriousness of his that sometimes disconcerted her. Grandma always said that the work you do with your hands belongs to you in a different way than everything else. That no one can take it away from you. Mei Ling placed the pencil on the notebook. He was 12 years old. 12 years old. And he was already quoting his great-grandmother with a precision no adult in their circle would have achieved. When did your grandma tell you that? Mei Ling asked, knowing full well he had never met her. You told me, Kai replied without looking up. The night you started making the kue, you said she taught you that. Mei Ling didn't answer. She got up, went to the kitchen, and filled a pot with water. Not because she needed to cook at that moment, but because sometimes she needed to do something with her hands to keep from crying in front of her son. What happened days later in the building was something Mei Ling could not have anticipated. Miss Devi called her to her office first thing. Mei Ling arrived with her trolley stopped in the corridor, wondering if she had done something wrong, if someone had complained about the kuei, if she had crossed some limit unknowingly. Miss Devi greeted her, standing with a folder in her hand and an expression that was difficult to read. "Sit down, Mei Ling." She sat on the edge of the chair as always. "Starting next pay period, your salary will be adjusted." Miss Devi opened the folder and slid a sheet across the desk. "It's a real increment, not an inflation adjustment. It applies to you and to all operational staff in the building." Mei Ling looked at the number on the sheet, read it once, then read it again. Because the first time she thought she had misunderstood, she had not misunderstood. "Why?" she asked. It was the only word she found. "Decision from top management." Miss Devi replied with professional neutrality, but something in her gaze said more than her words admitted. "Mr. Tan knows that Mei Ling began. "But Miss," Devi gently interrupted her. "I just need to know if you accept the new conditions." Mei Ling looked at the paper again. There was a part of her that wanted to ask more, that wanted to understand why, that wanted to know if there was something behind it, if it would cost her something she hadn't yet seen. Because life had taught her with brutal patience that good things that came without warning almost always came with fine print that no one read until it was too late. But another part, smaller, more tired, more honest, just wanted to accept. "I accept," she said. "Miss." Devi nodded and extended her hand. Mei Ling shook it with both hands. As always, that afternoon, without knowing exactly why, Mr. Tan went down to the lobby at 6 o'clock, when the cleaning shift was about to end. Mei Ling was leaving through the service door with her backpack slung over her shoulder and the empty jar in her hand. He saw her from afar and paused for a moment, not with fear, but with that precise measure of someone who decides how much space to give before knowing what's coming. "Good afternoon, Mr. Tan." "Good afternoon." He pointed to the empty jar. "Sold all of them?" "All of them. Before 5 o'clock. Mr. Tan nodded. There was something in his posture that was different from the man at the traffic light days ago. Less haste, less distance. "I spoke with Miss Devi today." "Yes, it's fine." Mei Ling looked at him directly, as was her custom. "Why did you do it?" It wasn't a question of gratitude. It was a real question, the kind that doesn't accept a corporate answer. Mr. Tan took a moment to respond, and when he didn't use the CEO's tone. "Because I reviewed your file and saw that for over a year, you've been the first to arrive and the last to leave. And I wondered, how many others like you are there in this building whom I had never taken the time to see?" Mei Ling didn't answer immediately. Outside, the city continued at its pace. Cars, horns, the bus that passed every 20 minutes, and which she could never reach by running without losing her dignity. "The answer is many," she finally said. "I know now," he replied. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, the kind that happens when two people are measuring something that doesn't yet have a name. "Thank you," Mei Ling said, just that, unadorned. "Don't thank me yet," Mr. Tan replied. And in his voice, there was something that sounded strangely like a self-admonition, as if he were talking to himself as much as to her. Mei Ling frowned slightly but didn't ask. She bade him farewell with a brief nod as always, and walked towards the bus stop with her back straight and the empty jar under her arm. "Mr. Tan watched her walk away from the lobby entrance, and for the first time in a long time, instead of returning to his office to review reports, he stood there doing nothing in particular, just thinking about what money sees, what it doesn't see, and everything he had stopped looking at for too long, convinced that being successful was the same as understanding the world. That night, for the first time in years, Mr. Tan arrived home before it was completely dark, and that, however small it seemed, was the beginning of something neither of them could yet imagine. There was a meeting Mr. Tan had been postponing for weeks. It wasn't with clients, it wasn't with banks, it was with his own partners, the three men who had built Suntech Zenith Holdings with him since the early years, when the company was barely a name on paper and a debt no bank wanted to finance. Mr. Chen, the eldest of the three, managed the financial area with the precision of someone who had learned to distrust cheerful numbers. When Mr. Tan entered the boardroom that morning, Mr. Chen already had the salary adjustment report on the table, open to the projected costs page with 2 lines underlined in red. 43 people. Mr. Chen said, without preamble, without good mornings, without coffee, an average increment of 18% in a single move, without consulting the board. Mr. Tan sat down, clasped his hands on the table. "Good morning, Mr. Chen." Alejandro, the second partner, Mr. Li, spoke with that tense calm of someone trying to moderate a conversation he already knew was going to heat up. "It's not that we're against improving working conditions, but these kinds of decisions have a process, they have an analysis, they've been waiting too long, Mr. Tan interrupted with a calm that disconcerted the two. Silence. The third partner, Mr. Wang, who until that moment had been looking at his phone, placed it face down on the table. It was the signal among them that something deserved full attention. "What happened?" Mr. Wang asked directly. "Because I've known you for 20 years, and this isn't a financial decision. This is something else." Mr. Tan looked at them one by one. "A jar of coconut kueh," he replied. The three partners looked at him as if he had spoken another language. "Explain," Mr. Chen said. And Mr. Tan did. He told them everything. The traffic light, Mei Ling, the file, the boardroom, the conversation in the lobby, without corporate embellishments, without strategic justifications. Just the facts in the order they had occurred, with the same uncomfortable honesty he had been practicing since that jar arrived in his kitchen. When he finished, the room was silent. It was Mr. Li who spoke first. "And the increase for all 43 is because you saw an employee selling sweets on the street?" "The increase for all 43 is because I had spent years not looking at what was happening in my own company," Mr. Tan replied. "And that is a mistake that it's my responsibility to correct." Mr. Chen closed the report. "It will impact the quarterly margin." "I know," investors will ask. "I know that too." "And what will you tell them?" Mr. Tan didn't hesitate. "The truth, that we decided to be a company that treats its people well, and that, in the long term, is the best investment there is." Mr. Wang let out a small puff of air. It wasn't a laugh. It was the sound of someone who had just recognized something he didn't expect to find. 15 years ago, Mr. Wang said slowly, "when we started this, you were the one telling us exactly that the company should be different, that we would take care of our people better than anyone." Mr. Tan didn't respond. "What happened in between?" Mr. Wang asked. And the question held no judgment, just an honesty that came from 2 decades of knowing each other. "Success happened," Mr. Tan replied in a low voice. "And I got distracted." Mei Ling knew nothing of that meeting. That same day, she was on the 16th floor, cleaning the windows of the south corridor, when her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. It was a number she didn't have saved. She let it vibrate. She had a rule. During her shift, the phone was for emergencies. Everything else could wait. When she finished the floor and went down to the staff break room for lunch, she listened to the message. It was from the hospital. There was a spot available in the operating theater for Kai's surgery. Last-minute cancellation. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They had 48 hours to confirm and cover the outstanding balance. 48 hours. Mei Ling sat on the bench in the break room with the phone in her hand and her unopened lunch container in front of her. She didn't cry. She didn't jump up. She remained completely still for almost a full minute, as people do when news is too big for the body, and the mind needs a moment to catch up. She opened her notebook, found the page where she kept her calculations, added what she had saved, what she had earned from the kueh, the first payment of the new salary that hadn't arrived yet. It was short, not by much, but it was short. She closed the notebook, put away her phone, opened her lunch container, and ate in silence, with that discipline of hers that wasn't coldness, but the armor of a woman who had learned that falling apart at the wrong moment solved nothing for anyone. She had 48 hours, and as long as there was time, there was possibility. What no one expected was what happened that afternoon in the building. Sarah Lim, the architect from the 4th floor, who had been Mei Ling's first internal customer, passed by the break room to get a coffee and found her there alone, with the notebook closed on the table and an expression Sarah immediately recognized, because it was the same one she had seen on her own mother years ago, the face of someone calculating the incalculable. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked. Mei Ling looked up. "Yes," was her usual reply, quick, clean, without visible cracks. But Sarah sat down anyway. "Mei Ling, can I ask you something personal? Are the sweets you sell for something specific? Someone mentioned something about your son, but I don't know if it's true, and I don't want to pry." Mei Ling looked at her. She calculated, as she always calculated before speaking. Sarah was young, kind, and didn't look like someone who asked to gossip later, but that wasn't always enough assurance. My son needs surgery, she finally said, with that economy of words she used when something mattered too much to be embellished. I'm saving up the balance that the insurance doesn't cover. How much is left? That's not. I'm not going to lend you money or pity you, Sarah interrupted her directly. I'm asking because I want to propose something, and I need to know if it makes sense or not. Mei Ling waited. I have a social media account where I post about work, design, processes, that kind of content. Quite a few people follow it. If you let me showcase your kueh there, how you make them, the story of your grandma's recipe, I guarantee that before tomorrow night, you'll sell more than you did all week. Silence. Mei Ling processed the proposal with that slowness of hers, which wasn't doubt, but respect for important decisions. I don't want the surgery to be discussed, she said. It won't be discussed. Only the kueh, only the story of the recipe. Nor do I want a victim's face. Nor that. I promise you. Mei Ling looked at her hands, the same hands that had made the kueh, that had cleaned 30 floors, that had opened the water tap so Kai wouldn't hear his mother cry. All right, she said. What happened in the following hours surpassed what either of them had calculated. Sarah filmed Mei Ling that same afternoon in the small kitchen of her HDB flat, before it got completely dark, without a script, without exaggerated filters. Just Mei Ling with her hands, working the coconut dough, explaining in her calm, precise voice how her grandmother had taught her that the exact proportion of sweet and salt was the secret to anything well made, not just kueh bangkit. My grandma used to say that without a pinch of salt, sweet doesn't taste like anything, Mei Ling explained, shaping the little balls with a dexterity that came from years, not days. That contrast is what makes things truly flavorful. Sarah, behind the camera, smiled without saying anything. The video was 42 seconds long. The next morning, when Mei Ling arrived for her shift, she had messages from people asking where they could buy the kueh. Sarah wrote to her at 7 a.m. It's already at 4,000 views, still climbing. By midday, orders had come in from 3 different floors of the building, from 2 neighborhood businesses that had seen the video, and from a lady living 6 blocks away who asked if she did deliveries. Mei Ling responded to all messages during her lunch break with her notebook open, jotting down quantities and addresses with the same seriousness with which she kept her accounts. She wasn't smiling like someone receiving an unexpected gift. She was smiling like someone seeing the plan work. That afternoon, Ben entered Mr. Tan's office with an expression that mixed confusion and something akin to involuntary admiration. Mr. Tan, did you see the video circulating on social media? Mr. Tan looked up from his documents. What video? Ben showed him his phone screen. Mr. Tan saw Mei Ling, her hands, the coconut, her grandmother's glacier, and listened to the phrase about salt and sweet, with the attention one gives when something small suddenly contains everything that matters. How many views? He asked. When I saw it, 8,000. Now I don't know. Mr. Tan returned the phone without saying anything. Ben waited a few seconds. Do you want me to do anything about it? No, Mr. Tan replied. Don't touch anything. Ben nodded and left. Mr. Tan stayed, looking at the space where the screen had been. He thought of Mei Ling responding to orders during her lunch break. He thought of Kai doing homework under a tilted lamp. He thought of his father telling him that the work that costs you something is the only work that teaches you something. And he thought of the warning he had given Mei Ling 2 days ago in the lobby. Don't thank me yet, because he hadn't yet told her what Miss Davy had discovered that morning while reviewing staff medical insurance files. A small clause buried in the collective agreement that no one had updated in years. A clause that stated that in cases of surgical intervention for direct dependence of employees with more than 12 months of continuous service, the company could extend medical coverage extraordinarily under approval from the general management. 1, 2, 3, 9. Mei Ling had 1 year and 3 months of service. The approval from general management was him, and he still hadn't signed anything because he wanted to do it right. Without haste, without it looking like charity, without Mei Ling feeling she owed anyone anything. He wanted that when it happened, it would feel like what it was, a debt the company had to her, not a favor he was doing her. That difference, which to many would have seemed insignificant, for Mr. Tan was the only one that mattered. He took the folder, found the page, and signed. Mei Ling arrived home that night with more orders than she could fulfill in a week, and her heart squeezed by the 48 hours that kept ticking in her head, like a clock without a pause button. Kai had already eaten dinner. He was in his room reading with that posture doctors had asked him to correct, and which he corrected every time he remembered it wasn't always. "Mama," he said when he heard her enter. "You were in a video." Mei Ling peeked into the room. You saw it? 3 schoolmates sent it to me, he smiled. They say your recipe is famous. Mei Ling entered, sat on the edge of his bed, and for a moment just looked at him. 12 years old. The spine that shouldn't be burdened further, the surgery that couldn't wait much longer, and that smile, identical to the man she had loved, and who was no longer there. Kai, she said. What? There's a spot in the operating theater for your operation. We have little time to confirm. The boy slowly put down his book. Do we have the money? Mei Ling hesitated for exactly 1 second. We will have it. It wasn't a lie, it was a promise. And there was an enormous difference between the two, even if both lived in the same territory of uncertainty. Kai looked at her with those eyes that saw more than they said. Are you sure? I'm working on it, she replied, with the honesty she had always promised to give him. Kai nodded, reopened his book, and then, without looking up, said something Mei Ling would not forget for a long time. Mama, you always find a way. Always. Mei Ling left the room, went to the kitchen, and filled the pot with water. This time it wasn't to cry. It was to make more kueh, because time was running out, because Kai needed that operation, and because her grandma was right. Dignity isn't begged for. It's earned through hard work. Always hard work. The 48 hours wait for no one. Mei Ling knew that better than anyone. She had spent the night making kueh, answering orders, writing numbers in her notebook, with that cramped handwriting she used when she wanted everything to fit on a single page. At 2 a.m., she turned off the stove. At 5 a.m., she was awake again. Kai was sleeping. She counted the money for the 3rd time, as if the numbers would change if she gave them another chance. They didn't change. It was less short than the day before, thanks to the video and the new orders. But it was still short. She put the notes away, closed the notebook, and prepared for her shift. There was something she wasn't going to do. Ask. She wasn't going to call anyone with an outstretched hand. She wasn't going to post her story with a face of defeat, so strangers would pity her. If the money came, it would come from her work, from her hands, from her grandma's recipe, and from the 30 floors she had been leaving impeccable for over a year before anyone stepped on them. That's how she had always lived. That's how she would continue. Miss Devi arrived at the building that morning with the folder signed by Mr. Tan in her hand, and a responsibility that felt heavier than usual. It wasn't a complicated document, it was an extension of medical coverage. 2 pages, 1 signature, but what it represented for the person who was going to receive it was something Miss Devi, after years in human resources, immediately recognized. It was the kind of news that changes the texture of an entire day. She waited for Mei Ling to finish the 22nd floor. She saw her arrive in the corridor with her trolley with that unfailing punctuality, and approached without hurrying. Mei Ling, when you can, I need 5 minutes with you. Mei Ling looked at her, nodded. They entered the small staff break room. Miss Devi closed the door, sat opposite her, and opened the folder without preamble because she had learned that with certain people, circumlocution was a lack of respect. Reviewing staff contracts, I found a clause for extraordinary medical coverage for direct dependents of employees with more than 12 continuous months of service. You qualify. She slid the document across the table. General management has already approved it. This covers the outstanding balance for your son's surgery. Mei Ling didn't speak. She looked at the paper, read the first line, then the second. Then she looked up at Miss Devi with an expression that wasn't joy yet. It was the expression of someone who has learned to verify before feeling. This existed before, she asked. The clause. Yes, it was always in the collective agreement. 1239. And why hadn't anyone told me? Miss Devi didn't avert her gaze, because no one had reviewed it in years. It was a company error, Mei Ling, and this document is the correction of that error. Silence. Mei Ling read the paper again, this time slowly, line by line, with the attention she gave to things that truly mattered. When she reached the end, she saw the signature. She recognized the name, Mr. Tan. She closed her eyes for a moment, just a moment. When she opened them, something in her face had changed. It wasn't euphoria. It was something deeper and calmer. It was the silent relief, the kind of relief that comes after carrying something very heavy for a long time and suddenly feeling the weight distributed differently. Do I need to do anything? She asked in a firm voice. Just sign the application request. I'll take care of the rest. Mei Ling took the pen, signed with both hands on the table, as she did with everything that mattered. What happened next was not in any plan. Mei Ling left that room, resumed her trolley, and continued with her shift as if nothing had changed externally. but something inside had loosened. A tension that had been lodged between her shoulders for months, which she had learned to ignore because she didn't have time to feel it, was suddenly gone. She cleaned the 23rd floor with the same precision as always, then the 24th. But when she reached the restroom in the north corridor of the 25th floor and closed the door, she sat on the edge of the sink, covered her mouth with her hand, and cried. Not from sadness, but from that strange thing that has no exact name, but which all mothers who have fought alone for their children recognize immediately. The cry that comes when you no longer have to be strong for a moment, when the danger has passed, and the body finally allows itself to feel what the mind didn't let it feel while things needed to be resolved. She cried for 3 minutes. Then she washed her face with cold water, looked at herself in the mirror, breathed, and went back to work. Mr. Tan didn't know about those 3 minutes. He never did. What he did know that same afternoon was that Miss Devi had delivered the document and that Mei Ling had signed it. She communicated it with a brief message. Mei Ling signed the request. Process underway. Mr. Tan read the message, placed the phone on his desk, and stared at the city from his 30th floor window. He thought of the warning he had given Mei Ling days ago. Don't thank me yet. Now he understood why he had said it, because he knew that at some point there would be something concrete to justify real gratitude, not the reflexive gratitude people express when they don't know what else to say. The other kind, the one that comes from deep within and holds weight. What he hadn't calculated was what he himself would feel. It wasn't pride. He knew pride well. He had been recognizing it in himself for years, every time he closed an important contract. This was different. It was more like the satisfaction of correcting something that had been twisted for too long. Like when a structure has had an invisible flaw for years and finally someone sees it, points it out, and repairs it before it collapses. That night, Mr. Tan did something he hadn't done since his father was alive. He called his eldest son, Kevin, not to ask about grades, not to transfer money for some expense, just to talk. His son, Kevin, who was 17 and had a relationship with his father, built primarily on cordial silences and respectful distance, took a moment to answer. When he did, his voice had that mix of surprise and caution that children have when a father who doesn't usually call suddenly calls. "Everything all right, Dad?" "Everything's fine, Mr. Tan replied. "I just wanted to know how you are." Pause. "Really?" "Really." Kevin took a moment, as if recalibrating the conversation. "I'm good. Had an exam today. How did it go?" "I think well. I don't know yet." "Which subject?" "History." Mr. Tan smiled slightly. "Which part?" And Kevin, with that distrust that dissolves when one realizes the question is genuine, began to talk. He talked about the class, his teacher, a debate they'd had about historical decisions that seemed right at the time, and later turned out to be mistakes. He spoke for almost 20 minutes without Mr. Tan having to force any response. When they hung up, Mr. Tan remained with the phone in his hand. 20 minutes. His son had spoken for 20 continuous minutes with him, something that hadn't happened since Kevin was 8 years old and hadn't yet learned that his father was always busy. All it had taken was to ask. That same night, Mei Ling called the clinic. She confirmed the surgery. The operator gave her the date, time, and pre-operative instructions. Mei Ling wrote everything in her notebook with the same cramped handwriting as always, but this time, the words took up more space than usual, because her hand wasn't trembling with anguish, but with something completely different. When she hung up, she went to Kai's room. He was reading, as almost always. He looked up when he saw her enter. "What happened?" he asked, because he knew his mother's face better than anyone in the world. Mei Ling sat beside him on the bed, took his hand, and squeezed it gently, just as he had done in the consultation room that day when the doctor spoke, and Kai was the one who gave her strength. "Your operation is confirmed," she said. Kai didn't shout. He didn't jump. He looked at her for a long second, with those eyes that saw everything, and then rested his head on his mother's shoulder, with the same naturalness with which one leans on something they know will not yield. "I told you you always find a way," he murmured. Mei Ling didn't respond. She put her arm around his shoulders, pulled him closer, and the two remained in silence in that small room with the tilted lamp, stacked books, and a window overlooking a street that wasn't pretty, but was theirs. Outside, the city remained the same. Inside, something had changed forever, and the most important thing about that moment wasn't what had arrived. It was everything Mei Ling had had to be for it to arrive. On the morning of Kai's surgery, Mei Ling arrived at the building at her usual time. No one had told her she could take the day off. She hadn't asked either. The operation was scheduled for 2 p.m., which meant she had time to complete her morning shift, go home, change Kai's clothes, and take him to the clinic with the calm he needed to see in her. That's how she had planned it. That's how she was going to execute it. What she hadn't planned was what she found upon entering through the service door. Sarah Lim was there waiting for her. It wasn't her usual time. It wasn't her entrance, and she didn't look like she had arrived by chance. "What are you doing here?" Mei Ling asked. "I'm here to tell you that you're not working today." Mei Ling frowned. "Sarah, listen to me." The architect raised a hand. "I spoke with Miss Devi. You have an authorized paid day off. It's already in the system. Your shift is covered." Mei Ling opened her mouth to reply, and Sarah continued before she could. "And don't tell me you don't need help, because today isn't about needing. It's about you being able to be with your son from early morning, without rushing, without arriving at the clinic still wearing your apron and your backpack." Silence. Mei Ling looked at Sarah, looked at the service door, looked at her hands. "Who authorized the day?" she asked. Sarah didn't reply immediately. "Miss Devi," she finally said. Mei Ling looked at her intently. "And who told Miss Devi?" Sarah held her gaze. "Go with your son, Mei Ling." Mr. Tan was not in the building that morning. He had a site visit to one of the construction projects on the outskirts of the city. It was a routine review that had been on his agenda for weeks and which, in other circumstances, he would have delegated without thinking twice. That morning, he went himself, not because the work specifically required it, but because ever since he had read Mei Ling's file, ever since he had signed that document, something in him had begun to move in a direction that had no name in any corporate leadership manual. He wanted to see. He wanted to look with the eyes he hadn't used for years, the same ones his father had always had, and that he had been losing layer by layer, as success built a comfortable distance between him and the real world. He walked the site for an hour with the engineer in charge, a man named David, who had been with the company for years and who, at first, was visibly tense at the unexpected presence of the CEO. Then he relaxed as he realized that Mr. Tan wasn't there to check for errors, but to ask things he had never asked before. "How's the team?" Mr. Tan said at one point, looking at the workers on the scaffolding. David looked at him sideways. "The performance, you mean?" "The team, the people. How are they?" David took a second to change his register. "There's a new young man who's been here 3 weeks, Zulkifli. He works well, but you can tell he's still learning." He subtly gestured towards a young man on the 3rd level. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. He sends money to his family in another country. He lives in shared lodging near the site. He hardly spends anything on himself so he can send more. Mr. Tan looked at the young man without him noticing. Young, focused, with the cautious movements of someone who knows he is learning and cannot afford to make mistakes. "What's his name?" "Zulkifli. Does he have all the safety equipment?" "Yes. Since last month's changes, everyone does." David looked at him with an expression that held something of recognition. "The lads noticed, Mr. Tan, the change in protocols. There were comments, good or bad." "None bad." Mr. Tan nodded. He kept walking. At 12 noon, Mei Ling and Kai arrived at the hospital. Kai carried his small backpack with the book he was reading, a change of clothes, and his headphones, which were practically an extension of his person. Mei Ling carried hers with the documents, insurance papers, her notebook, and a container of food that no one had asked her to bring, but which she had prepared anyway, because she needed to arrive with something made with her own hands. At reception, they were expected, no queues, no long waits, no labyrinth of forms that sometimes seemed designed to exhaust people before they even reached the doctor. Miss Devi had coordinated everything with the hospital the day before. Mei Ling noticed it, but said nothing. It was Kai who spoke as they waited in the pre-operative room, wearing a gown that was too big for him and made him seem more childlike than he was. "Mama? What? Are you nervous?" "No." Kai looked at her with that expression of his that meant, "I know you're lying, but I won't pressure you." "A little," Mei Ling corrected. "Me too," he admitted, "but only a little. The doctor said it's a surgery they do often, that for them it's routine. For them. For us, it can be 2, Kai said with the crushing logic of a 1-2-year-old. "If we decide, it is." Mei Ling looked at him for a long moment. "Where do you get these things from?" "From you," he replied without hesitation. What happened at Zenith Tower while Mei Ling was at the hospital was something no one had organized. Sarah Lim had uploaded a short story to her social media that morning, without revealing names, without medical details, without turning anyone's situation into consumable content. Just a phrase accompanied by a photo of the jar of kue. Today, someone I know and admire is in an important place. If you ever bought her sweets, thank you. Every jar was a step towards today. The response was immediate. People who had seen the video from the previous week began to write. Colleagues from the building left messages in the comments. Someone who didn't know Mei Ling personally wrote, "I don't know who she is, but I hope everything goes well. These kinds of people deserve good things to happen to them." On the 4th floor, 3 people from the design team placed an envelope with money on Sarah's desk, not because it was needed, but because they wanted to participate in some way in something that felt important. Sarah looked at it and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She put it away. She wasn't going to return it. She also didn't yet know exactly what to do with it, but there was something in that collective, spontaneous gesture, without coordination or obligation, that said more about the kind of community that could be built in a workplace than any human resources policy. The surgery lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Mei Ling spent them in the waiting room with her notebook open on her lap, without writing anything. She just needed it there as an anchor, as the habit of having something concrete in her hands when her inner world was spinning too much. When the doctor came out and called her name, Mei Ling stood up before he finished pronouncing it. Everything went well, the doctor said with that professional calm that, at that moment, was the most beautiful thing Mei Ling had heard in a long time. The correction was successful. Kai is in recovery. You can see him in a while. Mei Ling nodded. Is he okay? She asked. And in that question were all the others she couldn't utter. He's very well, the doctor confirmed. With proper follow-up, there should be no long-term limitations. Mei Ling returned to her chair, sat down, opened her notebook to a blank page, and wrote a single line in her usual cramped handwriting. Kai will be well. She underlined it. She read it once, then closed it. Mr. Tan received Miss Devi's message at 5 p.m., when he was already back in the city. It just said, Kai's surgery was successful. He read the message, put the phone away, and continued driving. At the next red light, he stopped. It was a different traffic light from that afternoon, on a different avenue with other cars beside him. But something about that moment, the red light, the pause, the silence inside the car, took him directly to the memory of the first gentle tap on his window, the glass jar, the 2 hands. He thought of everything that had happened since then. The decisions, the conversations, the meeting with the partners, the call with Kevin, the site visit, Zulkifli's name, which he would never have known if he hadn't started to look. Everything had begun with a woman who asked for nothing, who didn't complain, who didn't expect anyone to solve anything for her, who took her grandmother's recipe and a glass jar and built a path with what she had. The traffic light turned green. Mr. Tan drove off and took the long way home, the same one that passed by the avenue where everything had begun. Not because it was the most efficient route, but because sometimes places call us back when something important is closing its cycle. The traffic light was green when he passed. There was no one on the pavement, but Mr. Tan smiled anyway, because he knew that tomorrow, when Mei Ling returned to the building, something between them was going to be different. Not dramatically, not with grand gestures or speeches, just different in the way things change when 2 people have seen the best in each other without intending to. And that, Mr. Tan thought, as the city stretched around him, was exactly the kind of thing his father had tried to teach him, and which he had taken too long to understand. That the most important people in your life don't always arrive announced. Sometimes they arrive with a jar of sweets in their hands and an upright posture, and they change everything for you without asking permission. Kai spent the first night in the hospital with Mei Ling sitting beside him, not in a comfortable chair, but on the edge of the bed, with her back against the wall and her notebook closed on her lap. Because that night, there was nothing to calculate or write down. There was only being present. And Mei Ling, who had spent entire months running, calculating, problem-solving, discovered that staying still beside her son was the most difficult and most necessary thing she had done in a long time. Kai slept with that slow, deep breathing of someone who has just released something they were carrying without knowing it. The doctors had confirmed that everything had gone as planned. The correction was successful. The follow-up would be long, but the result, they said, would be worth every week of recovery. Mei Ling watched him sleep and thought of all the previous nights. The nights of the notebook and calculations. The nights of the running tap so he wouldn't hear. The nights she had promised things she didn't know if she could keep. And had kept them anyway because there was no other option but to keep going. At 3 a.m., Kai opened his eyes, saw her there, and wasn't surprised, as if he knew, even in his sleep, that she hadn't moved. "Mama," he murmured, his voice still thick with sleep and anesthesia. "I'm here. Is it all over now?" Is it all over? Kai closed his eyes again, but first, with the hand that still had the catheter taped to it, he searched for his mother's hand on the bed and found it. And so, the two remained in silence in that small hospital room where the outside world didn't exist for a moment. It was exactly that, just that, and it was enough. And days later, when Kai was already home with the medical instructions on the table and a list of rehabilitation exercises that he had read 3 times before Mei Ling had finished reading them once, there was a knock at the apartment door. Mei Ling opened it, expecting the upstairs neighbor, who sometimes left errands when going out. It was Sarah Lim. She carried a cloth bag and an expression that mixed joy with something slightly nervous, like someone bringing a gift who isn't sure if it will be well received. "Hello, I know I didn't call ahead. If it's not a good time, I'll just leave." "Come in," Mei Ling said. Sarah entered, greeted Kai, who was on the sofa with his usual book, and who received her with that natural cordiality of his that needed no prior warming up. They sat in the kitchen. Sarah placed the bag on the table. "This is from the people in the building," she said directly, because she had learned that with Mei Ling, beating around the bush didn't work. "When I posted the story about the Kuei, some colleagues left an envelope on my desk. Spontaneous. No one asked or organized it." Mei Ling looked at the bag without touching it. "Sarah, listen to me first." The architect raised a hand. "It's not pity. It's the opposite. It's people who saw something that mattered to them and wanted to participate in some way. There's an enormous difference between the two, and you know that better than anyone." Silence. Mei Ling looked at the bag, looked at Sarah, thought of her grandmother, who said that rejecting a genuine gesture with misguided pride was as impolite as asking for it. "How much is there?" she asked. "I didn't count it," Sarah replied. "It wasn't my business." Mei Ling took the bag with both hands, placed it on her lap. "Tell them thank you," she finally said, to each one. "I already did, but they wanted you to know directly." Kai, from the sofa, without looking up from his book, said loud enough for both to hear, "Mama, Grandma said that when the world gives you something with a clean heart, the right thing to do is to receive it with the same heart." Sarah looked at him, astonished. Mei Ling closed her eyes for a second. 12 years old, she murmured softly, with a mix of pride and surrender that only mothers understand. Mei Ling's return to the building occurred a week later. She arrived through the service entrance at her exact time, with her trolley, her backpack, with the jar of kueh in the cloth bag, as always, as if nothing had changed externally. But the people who knew her noticed something different in her posture. It wasn't new. It was more of herself, as if something she had once carried hunched over, she now carried upright. MDM. Go, the current supervisor, greeted her in the break room, with a coffee already poured, and made no comments about the absence, because there was nothing to comment on. It had been an authorized and justified absence. And, in MDM, Go's world, correct things needed no explanation. "Welcome back," she simply said. "Thank you," Mei Ling replied. And in that word, there was more than normally fits into 2 syllables. That morning, while cleaning the 18th floor, Mei Ling heard her name from the corridor. She turned around. Mr. Tan stood 3 meters away with his hands in his pockets, without the usual rush of men who have too many meetings. There was something in his posture that was different from the CEO of the first day. Less distance, more presence. "Welcome back," he said. "Thank you, Mr. Tan." There was a pause, the kind that isn't awkward because neither of them is in a hurry to break it. "How is Kai?" "Well, better than I expected." A pause. "Better than I expected, because he never doubted." Mr. Tan nodded. "I'm glad to hear that." Mei Ling leaned her mop against the wall carefully. She looked at him directly, as was her custom. "Mr. Tan, there's something I need to tell you." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted him, with that calm of hers, that wasn't stubbornness, but conviction. "I know about the document. I know you signed it." "Miss," Devi explained that the clause existed, but I also know that someone had to review it, find it, and decide it was worth applying. Mr. Tan didn't respond. "I won't owe you anything," Mei Ling continued firmly, "because you yourself said it was a correction, not a favor, and I believe you. But that doesn't mean I can't thank you, because I can, and I do." She paused briefly. Tan looked at her for a moment that carried more weight than either of them expected. "You also taught me something," he finally replied. "That work done with one's hands and with pride is worth more than any decision made from a 30th floor without looking down." Mei Ling looked at him, and for the first time since she knew him, she didn't calculate how much space to give before responding. "Your father had told you that before." Mr. Tan blinked in surprise. "How do you know that?" Because you told me without realizing it, Mei Ling replied. The first time we sat in that boardroom, you spoke of him without naming him, but he was in everything you said. Mr. Tan didn't respond for a moment. When he did, his voice had a different, more internal texture. He was a better man than I am. You still have time, Mei Ling said without hesitation, then picked up her mop and continued working. That afternoon, Mr. Tan called Mr. Wong, the partner who had known him for 20 years. The quarterly numbers are in, Mr. Wong said when he answered. Mr. Chen wants you to know that the impact of the salary adjustment was less than he projected. Staff turnover rates went down. 3 new clients signed contracts explicitly, citing our reputation as a responsible company. Mr. Tan listened without interrupting. Mr. Chen won't admit it out loud. Mr. Wong continued with an audible smile in his voice. But yesterday, he told me the decision wasn't as crazy as he thought. Tell him I appreciate it. Tell him yourself. Pause. Mr. Tan, what exactly happened with that employee, with Mei Ling? Mr. Tan thought of the right answer for a moment. She reminded me who I wanted to be when we started, he replied, and she showed me that it was still possible to be that person. Brief silence on the other end. Your father would be proud, Mr. Wong said. Mr. Tan didn't respond, but closed his eyes for a second with the expression of someone receiving something he had been needing for a long time without knowing it. That same week, Mr. Tan went to see Kevin. Not with an agenda, not with a corporate purpose, disguised as a family visit. It was a Tuesday afternoon. He knocked on his son's bedroom door and waited. Kevin opened it with his usual cautious expression. Is something wrong? No. Mr. Tan pointed to the inside of the room. Can I come in? His son stepped aside. The room was tidy in that particular way of teenagers who have their own system and don't need anyone else to understand it. Mr. Tan didn't comment on the tidiness. He sat on the edge of the desk and looked at his son, who remained standing by the door, as if still unsure if this was a conversation or an instruction. I want to ask you something, Mr. Tan said. What? Tell me about who you are, not how you're doing in school. Who you are, what matters to you, what worries you, what you want to be different. Kevin looked at him for a long moment. Why now? It was a fair question. Mr. Tan received it as such. Because I took too long to ask, and I don't want to take any longer. Kevin slowly sat in his chair, crossed his arms, thought, and then began to speak. He talked about school and a teacher who had made him think differently about what he wanted to study. He talked about a friend who was going through something difficult and not knowing exactly how to help him. He talked about sometimes feeling that in his home there was a lot of money and little time, and that for years he had confused the two because no one had taught him they were different things. Mr. Tan listened to everything without interrupting, without offering solutions, without turning any part of the conversation into a business lesson. When Kevin finished, both remained silent. Can I ask you something? Kevin said. Anything you want. What changed in you? Mr. Tan smiled slightly. A jar of coconut kue. Kevin looked at him without understanding. Someday I'll tell you, Mr. Tan said. And for the first time in years, his son laughed with him, not out of politeness, but genuinely. It was a small, spontaneous sound, unrehearsed. It was exactly the kind of priceless thing that Mr. Tan had taken too long to seek, but he was seeking it now. And that, as Mei Ling had told him that morning in the 18th floor corridor, was what still mattered. Weeks after the surgery, Kai walked alone to the kitchen for the first time, without leaning on anything. It wasn't a long distance. It was 8 steps from his room to the counter where his mother was preparing the morning's kue. 8 steps the doctor had said would come, which Mei Ling had waited for with that tense patience of someone who knows that time will do its work, but wishes they could help it along. Kai reached her, leaned slightly on the edge of the counter, and smiled. 8 steps, Mei Ling said. She looked at him. She counted mentally, though she had already counted them. 8 steps, she confirmed. Next week, it'll be 10. Next week, it'll be however many it is, she replied. No hurry. Kai looked at her with that expression of his that meant, we both know you're counting too. Mei Ling continued working the dough without saying anything else. But when Kai returned to his room, she remained with her hands still on the table for a moment. Just a moment, and smiled towards the empty jar, as if there were someone on the other side she wanted to tell something to. In Zenith Tower, things had also changed in ways that didn't always appear in reports. Zulkifli, the young construction worker, Mr. Tan had met during his visit, had been promoted to shift supervisor 2 weeks later. David, the engineer, had recommended him with a note that simply said, he works with his head and his heart. He's exactly what we need. When Mr. Tan read the note, He filed it in the folder where he now, unintentionally, collected small pieces of evidence that correct decisions have an effect that numbers don't always capture in time. Mr. Chen, the financial partner who had underlined the salary adjustment costs in red, requested a private meeting with Mr. Tan on a Tuesday morning. He arrived with the quarterly report in his hand, and an expression that Mr. Tan initially found hard to read, because it wasn't Mr. Chen's usual expression. It was humility. "The numbers closed better than projected," Mr. Chen said without preamble. "Staff turnover fell. Internal morale improved according to surveys, and we have 3 new contracts signed by clients who explicitly mentioned choosing Suntech Zenith because they heard we treat our people well." Mr. Tan listened. "I was wrong," Mr. Chen continued, and each word seemed to cost him exactly what it should, not in the financial analysis, but in what he thought was most important. "We were all wrong about that at some point," Mr. Tan replied. Mr. Chen nodded, extended his hand. Mr. Tan shook it. It was a small gesture between 2 men who had been building together for 20 years, but it carried the weight of something that had aligned after being crooked without either of them naming it. What happened one Friday afternoon in the building was not on any agenda. Mei Ling finished her shift at 5:30 p.m. As always, picked up her trolley, put away the jar, which had been empty before 1 p.m. that day, and took the service elevator down to the ground floor. When she opened the door to the lobby corridor, she found Miss Devi waiting for her. "Someone wants to talk to you," Miss Devi said, "if you have time." Mei Ling looked at her watch. Kai was with a neighbor until 7 p.m. She had time. She followed Miss Devi to the 3rd floor meeting room, not the large one where million-dollar decisions were made, but a small one with a round table and 4 chairs, used for conversations that didn't need imposing settings. "Mei Ling," Mr. Tan said when she entered. "Thanks for staying. Please sit." She sat down, this time not on the edge, but in the center of the chair, with her back straight. "This is Mr. Hassan," Mr. Tan explained. "He's the company lawyer." Mei Ling looked at Mr. Hassan, who nodded with professional cordiality, and then looked at Mr. Tan. "What's happening?" Mr. Tan sat opposite her, clasped his hands on the table with that calm he had been building week by week since that first afternoon at the traffic light. "When we started reviewing staff contracts to find the medical clause, we found other things that also needed correction." He paused briefly. "One of them directly affects you." Mei Ling waited. "You've been working at the entry level for over a year. According to the company's internal criteria, you qualified months ago for a different category with shift supervision duties, with a salary that reflects what you really do here." Mei Ling didn't respond immediately. "Mr. Hassan has the documents ready," Mr. Tan continued. "But before you sign anything, I want something to be clear." "What?" Mei Ling asked. "This isn't a favor. It's not recognition for what happened with Kai. It's nothing I'm creating for you." His words were slow and precise, like those of someone who had rehearsed this moment. Not for it to be perfect, but for it to be true. It's a correction of something that should have happened months ago and didn't because no one was looking. Now someone is looking, and that won't change. Mei Ling looked at him for a moment that carried the weight of everything before. The traffic light, the boardroom, the edge of the chair, the edge of the bed in the hospital, Kai's 8 steps that morning. "Can I read it before signing?" she asked. "Of course," Mr. Hassan said, sliding the folder towards her. Mei Ling opened it, read each page with that attention of hers that didn't skip lines or trust summaries. When she reached the end, she read the salary again. Then, she carefully closed the folder. "I have one condition," she said. Mr. Tan raised an eyebrow slightly. "If I'm going to supervise the shift," Mei Ling continued, "I want the team members to know they can come and talk to me if they have a difficult situation, not for me to solve it, but so that someone in this building listens to them before they have to solve alone what no one should solve alone." Silence. Mr. Hassan looked at Mr. Tan. Mr. Tan looked at Mei Ling. "That's not a condition," he finally replied. "That's exactly what the position is for." Mei Ling took the pen, signed with both hands on the table. As always. That afternoon, Mei Ling left the building through the main entrance, not the service door. It wasn't a dramatic decision or a calculated gesture. It was simply the most direct path to the bus stop from the 3rd floor. But when she pushed that glass door and stepped out onto the avenue with the empty jar under her arm and her backpack on her shoulder, something in that small detail carried the weight of something much larger. Sarah Lim, who was leaving at the same time, saw her and smiled without saying anything. The two walked together to the corner in silence, which was the kind of silence that only exists between people who no longer need to fill it to feel comfortable. At the corner, Sarah turned right, Mei Ling continued straight towards the bus stop. Mei Ling, Sarah called before turning. Mei Ling turned around. Your QA already have orders for next week. 9 jars confirmed from the 4th floor alone. Mei Ling looked at her with that expression of hers that wasn't surprise, but recognition. Tell them they'll have them by Thursday. Sarah nodded and turned the corner. Mei Ling continued walking. That night when she arrived home, Kai had already warmed dinner. He stood by the stove in his mother's apron, which was too long for him, stirring the rice with a concentration that would have been comical if it weren't completely sincere. Since when do you know how to cook? Mei Ling asked from the doorway. Since today, Kai replied without turning around. It turns out good or bad. But it turns out. Mei Ling put down her backpack, washed her hands, and sat at the table without saying anything else. Kai served both plates with the seriousness of someone doing something important. He sat opposite her. He waited. What happened today? He asked. You have a different look on your face. What look? A look that something changed, but you don't know how to tell it yet. Mei Ling looked at him. 12 years old. 12 years old. And he already read silences with a precision no adult around him had yet developed. They gave me a promotion, she said. Kai looked at her intently for a second. A real one? A real one. He didn't shout. He didn't jump. Like her. Like his mother. He remained still for a moment, processing it, and then picked up his fork and began to eat, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for good things to happen to people who deserved them. Grandma was right, he said with his mouth half full. About what? About everything, Kai replied. Mei Ling couldn't help it. She laughed. It was a small, spontaneous laugh, the kind that isn't announced, the kind that comes when the body decides that for a moment, nothing needs to be held back. And in that small kitchen, with a light bulb that no longer failed because Mei Ling had replaced it the week before, with 2 plates of rice that turned out good or bad, but turned out, with an empty glass jar on the counter waiting for the next batch of kueh, something settled, not with a crash, not with tears, not with a speech, but with the quiet calm of something that arrives to stay. Mr. Tan arrived home that night before 7 p.m. Kevin was in the kitchen trying to make something with eggs that clearly wasn't turning out as he expected. Cheryl, his 5-year-old daughter, watched him from the other side of the counter with a mix of amusement and sisterly pity. Mr. Tan put down his keys, rolled up his sleeves, and entered the kitchen without anyone asking him to. Turn the heat lower, he told Kevin, and stop stirring it so much. Eggs need time. Kevin looked at him, surprised. You know how to cook? Your grandfather taught me, Mr. Tan replied. He taught me once, and told me that was enough if I paid attention. Cheryl rested her elbows on the counter, suddenly curious. What else did Grandpa teach you? Mr. Tan lowered the heat, took the spatula, and thought about the question with the same attention he had given to everything since that afternoon at the traffic light. He taught me that the size of a man isn't measured by what he builds, he said slowly, but by how he treats the people who build with him. Silence in the kitchen. Kevin looked at the eggs. Cheryl looked at her father. And you had forgotten? Cheryl asked, with that direct honesty of 5-year-olds who don't calculate the impact before speaking. For a while. Yes, Mr. Tan admitted. But someone reminded me. Who? Kevin asked. Mr. Tan smiled. A woman with a jar of coconut kueh and the straightest back I've ever seen. His 2 children looked at him without fully understanding, but something in their father's tone, in that new calm they couldn't name but recognized, told them it was a story worth hearing. Tell us, Cheryl said. And Mr. Tan turned off the stove, served the eggs as best he could, and sat with his children at the table. And he told them everything, from the traffic light to the signing that afternoon, from the glass jar to the 8 steps of a child they didn't know, but whom, somehow, as they listened, they began to feel close to. From Mr. Tan Sr.'s phrase, which he had kept unused until a woman who cleaned floors returned it to him without knowing she was doing so. Kevin and Cheryl listened without interrupting. When he finished, the 3 remained silent around that table that for too long had been empty of conversations like this. It was Kevin who spoke first. Dad? What? Thank you for telling us. Mr. Tan looked at him, and at that moment, in that kitchen with the plate still on the table and the night outside and his 2 children in front of him, he understood something. No financial balance sheet had been able to teach him that the most real wealth isn't accumulated. It's shared, it's inherited, it's built quietly, with hands in the dough, with a straight back, with a glass jar worth SGD 20, and containing something priceless. He had only learned it from Mei Ling, from her grandmother, whom he never met, and from his father, who had always tried to tell him. A few days later, Mei Ling placed a new jar on the counter before leaving for work. Kai, who now walked without leaning on anything, passed by her, looked at it, and said without stopping, "They'll all be sold today. How do you know?" "Because you made them calmly," he replied. Grandma used to say that sweets made in a hurry taste like hurry, and these don't. Mei Ling watched him walk out towards his room, then looked at the jar, then smiled in that way that doesn't need anyone else to see it to be completely real, and went to work with both hands free, with her back straight, with everything she had built in silence. Step by step, yar by yar, without asking permission or pity, with exactly what her grandmother had taught her was enough. Hard work, pride, and the certainty that people who don't bend, sooner or later, find a way. They always find a way.